There I was, digging his hole in the ground, so big and sort of round it was, and there was I, digging it deep. It was flat at the bottom, and the sides were steep. Went along.
Greetings from another semi-productive day in isolation. Today I've managed to get hold of a wonderful and very experienced archaeologist, David Connolly, and he's agreed to talk a bit about what archaeology is, how we do it, and what exactly we do. So thanks, David, for allowing me to question you.
And thank you, Liska. I'll say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you are and wherever you are.
I thought I'd start from maybe the first question in this sort of thing, which is, why would a site generally be excavated? What would cause you to start?
There's two main reasons for wanting to excavate. Number one, which is it's actually the most important one, is when it is under threat. And under threat can be anything from you're building a new railway, a new road system, a new dam, a new housing scheme. All these are putting the archaeology under threat, and it's going to be destroyed. So therefore, that's one of the primary motives for doing most of the archaeology, at least in the UK. The other reason you might actually want to do archaeology, to excavate, is to learn stuff. And that's the brilliant archaeology. That's where you're actually putting that into an academic framework. You have questions to ask. Where does this culture bury its dead? Why are the hill forts found on these hills, not the other hills? So therefore you have questions you want answers to, and you prepare yourself a program, project to attempt to answer them.
And would both of these cases be carried out by the same sort of people? Or would one, say, be done by the government and another one by university? Or how does that work?
You got it exactly right. There are basically two types of archaeologists, though we do the same thing, and we can cross over. There's the commercial archaeologist who is normally paid either by the government or by developers or construction companies to go and remove the archaeology before the construction takes place. And then you have the academic archaeologist who's looking at an area, as I say, to answer broader questions that they may have. But that doesn't mean that a commercial archaeologist can't look at the academic side of it at the same time. The same as an academic archaeologist can quite easily fit into commercial projects to help specific questions that may arise from an excavation.
I see. And those archaeologists presumably don't work in isolation. They have some sort of teams or resources, other people helping them. Who else might be involved in an archaeological excavation? How big would these teams be, and who would be in them?
It's a good question, and it's hard to answer in a single sentence, but I will try, maybe two. Archaeological companies, whether it's a commercial company or whether you're actually within a university, is bizarrely sort of built around a military type of ranking system, where you have the person in charge, the director, who could be equated to perhaps the general, who has the overview of all the things that are going on and can then put his captains into the places that they need to be. Beneath them, you have kind of the sergeants, the supervisors, who are in charge of areas or maybe a small site. And beneath them, you have the foot soldiers, your diggers, your field archaeologists, who are the ones that actually get their hands dirty. But beyond that, again, a lot of people think that archaeologists just have a trowel in the hand and a spade in the other. You also have to have a whole range of specialists, of surveyors, of photographers. Then, of course, you've got people who may be doing the archival research and historians who are looking at the background of a place or a site before you even set foot into the field. So there's a vast range of people. A site can range from one person watching archaeology and to see if any of it's coming up on a site, all the way up to the largest site I've worked on is around about 70 archaeologists on one site.
Where was that?
That was actually back in the good old days in Scotland. It was the largest excavation in Europe of its time of an entire Roman fort near Dalkeith in Midlothian.
I see. It's nice actually that you mention excavations in Scotland, because just today, by coincidence, I happened to be talking to somebody about the history of pineapples, and I had sudden flashbacks to the excavation of the greenhouses for growing pineapples in Amersfield Walled Gardens, which was a dig we both took part in.
I still remember the pineapple. I mean, this is the thing. It's like it doesn't matter what you're excavating. Mm-hmm. You're there to create a story, to create that story from what you find. Mm-hmm. So many people think that archaeologists go out into the field to find treasure. I go out into the field to answer questions. Mm-hmm. What, as we said, what were these greenhouses in that walled garden? What were they used for? And by careful excavation, by looking at how the glass house was put together, by looking at the documentary evidence, by carefully documenting surveying, photography, all these elements come together, and we can then tell that's where they grew pineapples. This is how they did it.
I remember also there were quite a range of people who were involved in that project. Also, I was one in Sheriff's Side with you as well. And so I was wondering, the people who are actually on the ground doing the archaeology, where do they tend to come from? What kind of people are they? Do they have to be qualified archaeologists who have an archaeological degree? Or can somebody just sort of walk past a site and ask to join in? How do you get into archaeology?
Again, good question. Not an easy answer. And most archaeologists now have got degrees. They have degrees. They require it in order to have that breadth of knowledge, but they don't have technical skills. Now, you then have to work in the field to actually gain the knowledge of how to dig, how to actually tell that you've moved into a different soil. And that happens on field schools and training sort of excavations. Training excavations never really happen on commercial sites where you're maybe time limited or you're in a dangerous environment. Training excavations often happen with an academic environment where you're answering questions and you have the time to do it slowly. But the people that come on it are either students who are wanting to go on to become archaeologists themselves, interested locals who would like to dig beneath that green hill to find out what's been up there, or that they've known all their lives, and also people come from all over the world, perhaps to excavate an Iron Age fort in Scotland. How exciting is that to do? Or a Roman site down in England. They'll come from all over the world to excavate.
And I remember also talking about all over the world, not in the UK, I haven't come across it so much, but in say excavations in Italy or Greece, we sometimes have had workmen on the side. Is that very common, or is that something that's only in particular excavations? And do you think it's useful?
You love hitting me with difficult questions. In the Middle East, I often have workmen, and I find it both a great joy because I can move an awful lot more material.
Right.
And it gives me time to keep up with the documentation, and it allows me time to think about what it is that's coming out. However, I'm not getting my hands in there, so I'm not feeling the soil changes. I'm not spotting when a new postal pops up or something that will make me think. So there's balances on it. In Britain, we no longer use workmen to do it. We use a thing called JCB. However, Egypt, we'll be using workmen. In Germany, we used workmen as well. They were elderly road workers who would again shift the soil. In Poland, there's one archaeologist and 6 workmen. And so it is possible to do it if you do it correctly and if you're careful with your documentation.
It becomes more of a management job and oversight.
Yes. Yes.
And I remember there can be a bit of politics as well with the making sure that people are doing things in the right way, but not telling them about it in too much of a confrontational manner.
You have to remember that many of them have probably got many more years' experience than you do, especially in Egypt, for example, where families maybe have been doing it for centuries. It's actually a good test of management skills, where you are able to explain yourself succinctly about what you want without being some sort of pompous Englishman,
Right.
or I should say Britishman,
Yes, yeah.
or Scot.
I'll come back to the workmen in a little bit because I have another question related to that, so that we can start getting into the actual site and the process. What sort of things would you have to do on a site in order to begin? And do you have to do any physical preliminary work?
The main preliminary work is, has anybody done anything there before? And has anyone done anything in the area before? The other thing you would have to do would be survey, which could be something like geophysical survey, like resistivity, magnetometry, or ground penetrating radar, because it really helps to know what's beneath the ground before you start digging, so you can target exactly where you want to. Moving lots of earth is physically demanding, so it'd be quite good to do it in the right place. There's nothing worse than looking for a villa and digging the trench 2 feet away from it.
Right.
You could use LiDAR and you could use topographic survey as well, using either a traditional total station theodolite type thing or a differential GPS. But all these techniques you can do before you're actually putting a hole in the ground.
Right. And then presumably from your surveys you find the interesting features that you think could do with uncovering, and you start by opening up a trench over one of these.
Exactly. The site you mentioned earlier, Sheriff's Side, was spotted from aerial survey where there was a harsh, hot summer and parch marks showed up where the ditches were. So therefore, rather than just randomly place our trenches around the field, we placed them over the ditches so that we could actually then date the ditches, by dating the ditches, date the activity inside. We wanted to do it near the entrances as well, because that's where most of the activity would take place. So therefore, by using the remote sensing, which is the pre-excavation, we're able to then place our trenches using a GPS. Then you take off the topsoil, normally about 30 centimetres. Once that's scraped off, you're in there with the shovel and the trowel.
And also, if I remember Sheriff's Side correctly, we were digging a very deep ditch, and at some point it started raining.
Yes.
So this actually takes me quite neatly on to my next question, which is, what kind of conditions do you encounter on archaeological sites, and how would they affect the excavation? For example, Sheriff's Side had clay soil, it was quite dense, but also I guess on some excavations, you mentioned the desert in Egypt, that would be quite different excavation methods because of, well, the ground that you're digging in, really.
No, you're right. It's well remembered about Sheriff's Side, because the ground was basically like concrete. That meant that you could actually take your trench down deeper because it wasn't going to collapse in on you. The rule of thumb, and it's all about safety, we don't like people dying on our sites. Bad for business.
Understandable.
For every metre down you go in that sort of soil, you can step out a metre, so that there's always a way for you to escape out of a trench. If you want to go down 2 metres, you have to have a 3 metre wide trench. You are continually monitoring the type of soil, because you can imagine if you then hit a stony layer or a sand layer, then the clay could shear off and come down upon you. Sand is, oh dearie me, working in the desert is appalling.
I can't
you don't
even
have
imagine.
sides. You just do not have sides. It's just always falling in. So you have to have very, very big trenches that you can just go down very slowly. You can go down maybe about 20 centimetres. If you ever dug a nice sort of little trench in the beach, then you'll know yourself. It just, with loose sand, it will fall apart within a few spadefuls. You're also looking at the weather as well. You're right. If it starts to rain, then you have to think, will the ground take it? So there's all these things that you have to consider. Even too much sun can be bad for it as well. So do you have a cover across your site? Do you protect it from rain? If it rains badly enough, then you don't want people walking backwards and forwards across a beautifully clean surface, because basically you'll then take off the next that much on the base of your shoes. Checking the weather conditions, checking the soil conditions, you're doing it all the time.
Right. Are you able to dam up the sides of the trench, for example, in a very sandy environment, if you're looking to dig down a bit deeper?
You can. You use a shoring. Again, it's good to have an engineer in, and they might put metal sheets down and then metal rods across, which will hold back the sides.
Mm-hmm.
Only when it's safe can you go into a trench. The deepest trench I've been in is 5 meters in York. I can tell you, if your trench is 2 meters wide and you're 5 meters down, you are wanting the sides to stay up.
Right. Yes, that sounds more like a well to a certain extent.
It does kind of feel that you're looking up into a small sliver of sky, and when you're dealing with that, then you actually start getting to engineering, where you have to have shoring to hold back the sides, and you check every morning and evening and afternoon that the hydraulic rams that are holding back these sides are functioning properly.
Right. If you've ever seen a clip of the Monte statue in Rome, it's a hill made of Roman amphora fragments. They've cut a shaft down into it with just enough space for an elevator, a one-man elevator, or maybe a person on a ladder to climb down into. And that was definitely the work of an engineer. That was very well boarded up at the sides. But it is really cool because you can see the individual fragments of pottery as you go down.
Absolutely. We probably have nice planks and bits of metal sort of rods going across it. Definitely.
It looked like it. Okay, when you're excavating the trench, what are the steps in actually taking off the soil and documenting what you find?
Often it's like we get told that we're robots because you get into a process. You basically go to a thing called the context register. Every different layer, every different pit cut, every different fill inside a pit, every wall gets one number which can identify it, whether you take a photograph or a plan or samples, finds. And so the first thing you do is assign yourself a context number. You go to the register and you physically take a number. I go back to the trench where I was about to excavate a pit. I clean it to show the entire extent of that pit. I then begin excavating by hand the material from that pit, this context 1482. I might start by taking a sample into a plastic bag. That will be taken away for environmental sample of the soil. So that's done. That, of course, gets a number. I can then go to the sample register and I say I took a sample of context 1482. I then put context 1482 on the bag or the box. So you see how everything's cross-related. But basically, get your context number, take your sample, excavate as you're going along. I should have said prior to that, you've taken a photograph of it before you dig it up.
Right, before destroying it, you document.
Yes, before you destroy it, you've taken a photograph of it and planned it. Once you've taken out that context, it's time to take another photograph of it, do another plan of it. Then you go and take all the finds that you've taken from that previous context, get them into a plastic bag, put them to one side. You've now got your next fill. So yes, you now go back to the context register, get your next number, go back to your site. You then dig out that. You've taken your sample, you get your finds. Write all your details into a thing called the context sheet. How that context refers to others. What pit is it in? What was above it? What was below it? What did you find in it? What do you think about it? And round you go. It's just context number. Take your sample, plan, photograph, dig, collect, context number, take your sample, plan, etc.
When you say you excavate it, where do you start? Do you go with the pickaxe? You go with the toothbrush straight away? And which way do you dig as well? I'm curious. I can't remember whether you dig forwards or backwards in the UK because I remember this is a
Well,
contentious issue.
I always dig from the known to the unknown.
Mm.
And I think I upset some workmen recently because they were kept on saying to me, "Where's your little brush?" And I laughed because I had a shovel, a spade, and a thing called a mattock, a flat-bladed pickaxe type thing, and of course my trowel.
Mm.
But I prefer to know what I'm doing first, so that's why I keep the air clean. I'll then maybe a little look with trowel to see where's the layer going. Does it go straight down? Is it this thin? Is it that big? How deep does it go? I can then decide what is the correct tool to use. And I might pull out a small bamboo stick and very carefully poke away at it. Or I might use the trowel, or then I might step it up to using a spade, or as I was doing recently in a castle where in the 1800s they filled the lower levels with rubble, which is very good of them. And I advise you not to attempt to excavate 1 metre worth of rubble with a trowel, as you'll be there for the next 40 years. So out came the mattock, and that could prise apart the rubble. But even then, as I prized out the rubble, I would never let it just end up in a big pile. I would always take out a small section, clean it up, see that I wasn't down onto another layer, take out another section, clean it up, make sure, until I was happy. And that way, you can see the changes and differences.
Mm. And you said until you were happy. Does it have like a set time period that you're working on a dig, or is there some particular milestone that you reach in a project that would cause you to finish? How do you decide when to call it a day?
When to call it a day? Well, again, if you're working for a commercial operation, you have decided that you will be able to do X amount of work in X amount of time for X amount of money. So therefore, every extra day that you're there on site, then you're losing money. And this is the unhappy balance of commercial archaeology with archaeology. In academic archaeology, wonderful. You have no time limits. There's no reason for you to destroy everything because you can go back the next year and the next year and on you go because the site is not under threat. The only thing that the site is under threat from is you. So take your time, enjoy doing it, and you can maybe spend a bit more time. That doesn't mean that as a commercial archaeologist you are making a mess of it, or as an academic archaeologist you are taking far too long. You are getting the maximum amount of information in the minimum amount of time and the minimum amount of effort. And as long as you keep the samples, and in many cases keep a lot of the site undug, then people can always go back and have a look at it again in the future. So, in answer to your question, how long is that piece of Egyptian string? Who knows? It is good to have a time limit, though. It really is good to have a time limit.
Right, as with many things, I think.
I like a project to last no more than 5 years.
That's over several seasons, right? You wouldn't be there continuously.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
So a season can be about 4 to 8 weeks, sometimes longer.
I see. And what would the results or what would the output be from the project that you're working on? What are you looking to put out at the end of it?
Well, I'd like to have a series on the Discovery Channel. And,
wouldn't we all?
But what actually you start with is the rather dull thing. It's the excavation report. At the end of every season, you write up what it was you found during that season, what you think it all means. You have boring lists of every context that you found, every photograph that you took, every sample that you took, every plan that you drew, list upon list. There's nothing better than a perfect list. And I get very upset if, for example, we have to delete a photograph and so my numbering system is completely ruined. But that's your basic report. That's your excavation report, your structure report, which after you've completed all your seasons, you can then turn into an article, a monograph, perhaps even a book. We one hell of a project to actually have a book out of it, but there's no reason why you can't have a decent-sized article which synthesizes everything that you've gained during these previous seasons, these 5 seasons, or write a monograph where you're actually comparing it. And this is what you really have to do, is compare it with other sites as well, write a monograph. Exhibition and local involvement. There's no point in doing archaeology if nobody knows. And so therefore, give lectures, give talks, go to conferences, tell other people what you've been doing and listen to what they've been up to as well. It's all about sharing. So you've got your reports, your articles, your papers, your conference papers, your monograph, and your lectures and talks. At the end of the day, archaeology is about storytelling. I always say that what you're doing in the whole process is gathering all the little elements of a story. You want the heroes and the heroines. You want the place and the topography. You want to understand it all and then bring it together into a clear narrative. Now, whether or not it's something like at Must Farm, which is an amazing site down in England, where we have a Bronze Age village that burnt to the ground, and everything's there to tell a story of the last few minutes of a Bronze Age village. How brilliant is that? Or at Sheriffside, where we have tantalizing elements, where we have a site which was occupied from 1200 BC until at least the 6th century AD, which had these massive ditches which coincide with the Great Barbarian Conspiracy. That's a story that you can tell using archaeology. And also it helps people to understand why the people are where they are, why the towns, villages, the roads. That's what archaeology does. It tells a story.
Also, on the topic of the last minutes of a Bronze Age village, archaeology doesn't have to be written by the winners, unlike many parts of history, or in fact even written by people who can write.
That's true. It's true. It's like one of these forensic dramas where the murder victim is able to speak up and we learn more about them.
Right. We're wannabe forensic scientists.
I like that.
Excellent. Back to Poirot. Full circle. Cool. And so last but not least, I really wanted to ask, what happens with the finds of a dig site? Because we bag and box so many things. Where do they end up?
Basically, what I do is I then go to eBay and I...
God, you had me for a minute. It's on record.
No, in Britain, well, I should say it's actually very different. My career's ruined. In Britain, what happens to finds is they are bag tagged and then stored. So in Scotland, we actually have to declare them to the Queen. It goes to the Queen's Lord Treasurer Remembrancer, who has a look at what's been found and decides whether or not the Queen wants it or not. If the Queen doesn't want it, and she's yet to want anything that I've found, it is then for the local museums. And if the museums don't want it, and it's not in a sort of a decent sort of collection, it's not worth it. You know, if you've got a selection of 19th century pottery, you often offer it back to the client to let them have something out of it, or give it to schools to let them have some fun with it, or give it to a university so they have a teaching collection.
Right.
Mainly it goes into storage, and that, if you remember the final scene of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, when he asks who is looking after the Ark of the Covenant and who's studying it, and they go, top people. It then fades to a massive warehouse stretching back off into the distance with row upon row of blocks, all with numbers on them. That's basically where most of the finds end up, apart from a few that pop out and end up in the display case. People like a bit of gold, admittedly, but they also do like the story. So going back to that pineapple excavation in Paddington Museum in East Lothian, the objects help to tell the story. They can actually ground people into understanding what it is that you're telling them. And I love people going away from an exhibition, for example, where you're showing them the best of your finds and going, I didn't know that. I'm going to tell and annoy someone else and let them know that story as well.
We've moved away from shiny things and given value of a different sort.
Absolutely. I have been on sites where we have found gold. I've been on sites where we have found perhaps a small Neolithic scraper. And I equate them the same. They are of the same value as they're little pieces in the narrative of who we are, and it's how we present it. It is one of the most difficult things that archaeology wrestles with. We have to admit where we came from, out to the antiquarians, where the value was seen not in the small piece of broken pottery that we could maybe get a lipid analysis to work out what sort of food was in the pot. It's not in the smashed bottle of glass. I have a base of a bottle just now from the Garton Castle, in the excavation I'm on just now. And it's called a mallet style. It dates between 1750 and 1780, and it held brandy. Brilliant. And at that point in time, we know who was living there. And now we know what they were drinking. They held this bottle. They poured out glasses of brandy from it. How brilliant is that? We also found a small coin in the mortar made of just copper, but it's a Victorian farthing, which tells us when they blocked in the door. And when the person blocked in the door, they pressed the farthing into the mortar for us to find 170 years later. How amazing is that?
And date that particular event.
That's where it comes in useful.
Excellent. Thanks very much for talking to me about this. I've been wondering about quite a few of those things for quite a while. Is there anything that I didn't cover or that we...
No, because it's been a fascinating, for me, I'm going to steal this, because it is, you've looked at actually the whole process from why do we dig to when you actually finish the entire project, you walk away and you go to your next one.
Mm-hmm.
What's the whole process? And the process is immense. The great bulk, like myself, lies beneath the excavation in the analysis and the post-processing and the post-excavation work and the specialists and the people who look at the samples. I have samples of ash. I want them to look at all these other things.
Mm.
So what you've given me is an ability to understand what I do as well. I'm not doing so shabbily, if I may say so.
No, not at all. And it's not all walking around in white flannel shirts and trousers.
Not all of it. Only a good part of it.
That's
I'm
important
going to buy John Person. I'm going to buy John Person.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much.
I like the way you work it. No diggity. I got to bag it up. I like the way you work it. No diggity. I got to bag it up. I like the way you work it. No diggity. I got to bag it up.